Oh boy, it's time for me to take a video uploaded by Kane and analyze every single detail again. Yes, Kane uploaded a new video for Backrooms, and this one is titled Static Dead End. This video is a short one, coming in at just over 4 minutes, and apparently that was enough to justify me reacting to it. I mean, do I really analyze things that much? You know what? Don't answer that. Let's instead look at the description of the video, because it's here in the description that we get the date May 29th, 1990. Now, not to go on an immediate tangent, but I'll be making a timeline of the events so far in the narrative, and unfortunately I don't have a cool whiteboard like Wendigoon does, but I do have Da Vinci, so, you know. So, after we finish discussing the main events of the video, we'll quickly put together a timeline and go a bit deeper into what this latest Backrooms video has hidden for us. The video starts off with an intro sequence that is reminiscent of Report. While this intro seems to be taking place during sunrise or sunset, honestly, I can't really tell. The intro for Report is taking place during the morning, or at least sometime during the day. They also both feature a quick establishing shot of async. I just thought it was a cool cinematic detail to make a note of, and especially because it further calls back to the theme of repetition and reflection within the narrative itself. We then see a shot of a lab as the lights turn on, and I know you saw this whiteboard, and I know you don't know that I actually didn't see this whiteboard and someone showed it to me, but you wouldn't have known that had I not told you. But I'm not going to edit it out. This whiteboard seems to be an isometric view of the red neighborhood, and while the writing is ineligible from our point of view, we do have that whiteboard asset that we can take a look at a bit later, and it actually shows everything that's written on there. So there's a clock here on the wall too, and honestly I tried my hardest to see if I could read the clock to see if it read as 7:16, but the glare is super obstructive so I couldn't really see. The next shot is of what looks like a storage room, and in here we see the model of the area immediately after the threshold that Async built, as well as the concept images that were made for the A-Space presentation Async had for the Department of Energy. We can also see random things like plants and boxes and maybe even a chair, but we also see a grandfather clock, which also does not read 7:16. But this grandfather clock does seem to appear in Found Footage 3, and that one did read 7:16. Also, if you look closely behind the grandfather clock, you can see what looks like black smudges forming on the wall. Could this possibly be a new and growing colony of the Hay bacillus bacteria? The camera pans further down towards the lowest level of Async, and we can see the hallway just before the threshold that houses the PPE and the first aid supplies. Finally, we get a different introduction shot, and this is specifically for the threshold. Here, we see the lights turn on, illuminating the area directly in front of the threshold. This also reveals a lone chair positioned to sit facing towards the threshold, as if someone was keeping watch on it, either for safety reasons or obsessive reasons. That much remains to be seen, however. Now, there is a major component of the video that I have neglected to mention so far, and that is the conversation between George and Marvin that can be heard overlaying the shots I just discussed. I'll subtitle it here, so skip to this timestamp if you've already heard it or just want to skip. Okay, for those of you who stayed, here's the captioned conversation.
No, I don't like this, and you shouldn't either.
What are you trying to get out of this, Marvin? We're on the same side, for God's sake. I don't disagree that things were handled poorly, but please, can you try to have a little perspective here?
Handled poorly. They killed him, George. He was alive and well, and you can't tell me for a second that the United States Department of Energy didn't have the resources to fix things. Are you kidding me?
Neither you nor I know exactly what happened, and frankly, it shouldn't be something that concerns us. Look, I know you appreciate how lucky we are to be a part of this project. It's not worth dying on this hill.
Yeah, but what if next time it's you? Huh? Or me?
Marv, come on.
Yeah, you want to put me down like an animal over a minor fucking hiccup? Give a speech at my memorial? It's not cost-effective, George.
Yeah, but we're not going to let that happen, are we? You know how I know? You're the fourth person I've had this conversation with. Nobody wants a repeat of what just happened. Listen, I know how stressful this is, but the best thing you can do now is just take a couple weeks off, give yourself a chance to process, and, you know, that'll show them that we can handle these kinds of things.
Yeah. Sorry, I know, you're right. I think I just had to get that out of my system. I don't know what that was.
No, please, I get it. I think it's the right call. You gotta keep pushing forward, okay?
We then switch to the camera view of our researcher, George. Now, I'm not gonna lie. This was cinema, okay? This was art. When the cut from the cinematic to the footage happened, like, I smiled, okay? Like, I cheesed a little. It was really cool. We need to talk about this conversation between George and Marvin, though. For context, if we remember the date from the description, May 29th, 1990, you'll see it only takes place a few days after the events of Damage Control. Of course, in Damage Control, we saw Peter Tench, Freddy Fazbear jump scare the research squad, and then absolutely blast Mark. It was really bad for everyone involved. We then see through CCTV footage of Async that Peter managed to make it to the threshold, back into Standard, where he was confronted by Dr. Maxwell and another researcher, and subsequently disarmed. Though Peter still somehow managed to hightail it out of there and into the freight elevator. She's a runner, she's a track star. According to Async execs, Peter was supposedly found downhill, where they stated that they think he tripped and hit his head on a rock or something. And I know Wendigoon already made this joke, but that explanation is giving... Of course, thanks to the latest and greatest techniques of frame scrubbing, we see several images in the end of Damage Control, and some of these are CCTV stills of what appears to be someone running through the streets. I'm still of the firm belief that this is Peter, and he managed to somehow escape from Async and has now gone into hiding. This conversation, however, seems to reference the way in which Async covered up Peter's disappearance. Marvin bitterly makes a point to George that this wasn't something that was just handled poorly, and he even questions whether George would be as happy to go along with the whims of the higher-ups with him as he has been with Peter, even going so far as to ask whether George would put him down like an animal and then feign grief at his memorial service. It's a very sobering sentence, and it packs a raw emotional punch. We know that Async is a small organization, so we can assume that the members at least know each other well enough at a minimum, but to Marvin, Peter probably wasn't just a coworker or a researcher. He was a friend. He had a family. A family who was lied to and told that their father and husband had been involved in an accident and tragically lost his life from it. How could Async, a company that had previously treated their researchers very well, suddenly turn around and do these morally questionable things? Marvin is absolutely valid to feel this way. Now, on the other hand, George does make a valid point. This isn't just a case of a workplace accident gone wrong. They're working in an uncanny and unpredictable landscape that exists outside of space and time. They're wandering around blind to the fact that there are entities which, quite frankly, are incomprehensible man-made horrors, and they've experienced distortions of space and fluctuations of time. Async doesn't have the luxury of having foresight to prevent accidents. Look at all the things they changed as time passed and they learned more about the complex. They have permanent guidelines, they use rovers now, they arm themselves, they use PPE, they avoid unstable areas at all costs. It's like OSHA. All the guidelines are written in blood. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. With all that being said, how do you do damage control on a situation where a member of your team suddenly disappears for 2 months and then reemerges perfectly healthy and fine as if only a few hours had gone by for them? How do you handle the realization of what you've done in response to what happened? It can't really be easy for them to be like, hey, so your husband, Peter Tench, great guy. Yeah, he kind of vanished doing research in this like pocket dimension like place that exists outside of space and time, and like we have no idea where he could be or how he is, but anyway, here's his box of stuff. Like, that's just not realistic. When you think about it like that, it makes sense why Async resorted to using a car accident victim that was presumably charred beyond recognition in order to quietly sweep Peter's disappearance under the rug. This is unprecedented territory, and unorthodox situations require unorthodox solutions. But honestly, Async, that was not very slay of you, okay, babe? Blink twice if the Department of Energy is holding you hostage. I'll send help. The last thing about that conversation that I wanted to point out is the fact that it was being recorded. Why exactly was it being recorded? Are George and Marvin aware that they're being recorded? Is it like a counseling session that workplaces will have when they lose an employee? Is Async bugged by the DOE? I have a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. Sponsors! The rest of the episode is the camera footage from George's perspective. Remember, this takes place after damage control, and we can see that Async has made significant progress in not only sealing up the other pitfalls, but they're setting up what looks like a harness and a lift in order to lower researchers in and out of that pitfall towards the red neighborhood. We can also see another researcher down the hallway when the video initially cuts to George's footage, which makes me think that while they were examining this room and the room beyond the door, another group of researchers were probably examining the room where Peter ambushed Mark and Marvin, as well as the map that Peter had left drawn on the wall. George turns towards the pitfalls and heads towards the door on the other side of the room, taking the time to look at the lift that's being built and peek into a pitfall before approaching the door. I'm not gonna lie, this had me so hyped, not only because it matched exactly what was behind the door in the Gmod map that Wendigoon, Kane, and Alex all played on, but because we finally get to see confirmation of what exactly lies beyond that door. So let's talk about that, shall we? George approaches the door and slowly peeks into the room, looking around the corner in an almost apprehensive way, and I don't blame him. Immediately, we can see that something is really off about the wallpaper, but also very familiar. George is fixated on the wall before Kim comes up behind him, ready to brief him on the initial investigation of the room.
George?
Oh, hey.
Hey. You had a chance to look around back here yet?
No, not yet, but I'm seeing it now.
Okay, cool. Wait here for a second. I want to show you what we found down the hall in just a moment.
Sure.
But he sits down. But I think they're bonding together enough that it should come out chunkier.
Oh, weird. This is even stranger than I thought.
But I want to make sure that I down, up,
Huh.
try up, down, this one, down, and okay, let's try that.
Well, Mark didn't say anything about it flowing in a specific direction, but he did say that it was, remember, pretty horizontal in nature. It was stretching off around the corner. So the pattern seems to align pretty closely to what he illustrated.
Yeah, so wait, this is the room you guys already cleared?
Yeah, so we went around and checked it out earlier. It's a dead end. There's some dips in the floor that I would recommend you avoid. We haven't checked those yet, but all signs point to it being safe. So venture at your own peril.
Oh,
I think you'll be fine.
okay. Oh. Oh, okay, you weren't kidding. This is interesting.
George then fixates on a lawn chair that's sitting on what looks like a rounded hill, and the video ends. We have a lot to talk about, so buckle up. First things first. When George peeks around the corner towards the left after entering the room, we can see what looks almost like an oddly placed window, but in typical Kane Pixels fashion, it's hard to distinguish. As George approaches the wall with the stretch texture, we see that some researchers have taped off certain sections of the wall, and one of them is talking about bonding? So maybe this is implying that new wall growth bonds with old wall and becomes a uniform pattern as time passes? This is my best guess, considering that the other side of the hallway that George ventures down has the standard wallpaper pattern that we see throughout most of the complex. Not to mention, there are only 2 instances of this stretched wallpaper texture that we see. The rest of the time that we're in the complex, we see the familiar yellow wallpaper and it's always uniform. The only other time that we've seen this stretched wallpaper texture was an informational video when Peter comes across his own static dead end, which is what I will be referring to these areas with stretch wallpaper textures. But Peter comes across his own dead end and we see that stretch texture. The main difference being that this shows a vertical growth pattern rather than a horizontal one like we saw in the hallway. This seems to suggest that new rooms can seemingly and quite literally, I guess, grow out of the ground, at least in the sense that the wall will stretch upwards to create an entryway and a ceiling. Now, we don't really have to wonder what that process looks like because found footage 2 showed it to us very clearly. It seems like those quote-unquote cracks in the wall are where the wallpaper will begin to stretch and grow. And if you look at the way the textures meet in the middle, you can see that it looks similar to the crack forming on the wall in found footage too. So it seems like the dead end that Madison found herself in ended up expanding somehow. Little tangent here, but for those of you who watch my spooky sublevel videos, I recently put out a new video for that series, and one of the sublevels I talked about, dullness, actually talks about how there are energy fluctuations known as distortions in the sublevel, and these distortions render the sublevel unstable, which allows wanderers to safely no-clip out of the sublevel. And while I know that Kane has his own narrative and doesn't base his work on like the fandom wiki or anything like that, I don't think it's far-fetched to see the connections between that final scene in found footage 2 and the description of the energy fluctuations leading to no-clip opportunities. I will die on this hill, and you can sit on said hill right here in this lawn chair. No? Yeah, good choice. I don't think I'd want to sit on the random hill chair either, honestly. But this makes me wonder, if Mark had approached the expansion as it was happening, would he also be able to no-clip due to the instability that is occurring in the area? Oh, if only Mark had his own camera that day. The things we may have seen. What could have been? Oh well. So, not only are the cracks in the wall during the expansion similar to the ones we see here in Static Dead End, but the stretching texture we see here is similar to the one we see in informational video when Peter comes across his own dead end. There's a lot of other similarities I noticed here. Whereas the dead end that Peter found had lower ceilings, the hallway that George walks through is more narrow. Not only that, but it seems like the expansion isn't uniform. We see a random dip in the floor that kind of slopes downwards. It's not a sharp drop off like the pitfalls. In fact, it looks more like a slide or a chute or something. And we even heard from Kim that Mark noted that the growth and expansion also wasn't uniform. And again, we have the texture here in Static Dead End expanding horizontally, while the texture in informational video suggests vertical expansion. Whereas informational video had distorted wheelbarrows that looked stretched and even slightly compressed, Static Dead End had objects that were no-clipping into the ground and the wall, like a soccer ball, tables, and a couch. We also had not one, but 2 lawn chairs. They seem to be facing each other too, which I feel like is reminiscent of the lone chair that's just sitting in front of the threshold in the beginning of the video. I think it's pretty neat that Kane spends so much time focusing on the shots of these solitary chairs, because we keep getting hints of an unknown face or force constantly showing hints of its own existence, like the chair in the pseudo pitfall room of this video and the radio tower in found footage 3, for example. This keeps poking the part of my brain where my Ivan Beck and the complex are intrinsically connected theory lives, and I don't know, man, the more connections I see, the more I believe it. We should also talk about how similar this dead end is in appearance to the pitfall room. Here we see what looks like the beginnings of these pitfalls being created, but obviously their depths are not uniform. We see one that has barely scratched the surface of growing downwards, which sounds wrong to say, but we also see another pit that looks just like the ones from the pitfall room in regards to depth. This entire room is a perfect example of the reflective nature of the complex, and calls into question whether the complex only reflects the information from the wanderers within it, or if it also attempts to make areas from memory, like using a prefab to make a new room, but instead of it being nice and coherent and similar to another room, it looks like you gave it to Bethesda to render and they said, yeah, this looks good. Couple this with the objects being half clipped into the ground and the wall and the uneven terrain in general, i.e. the random hill and the slope, and you have a room that screams instability, chaos, disorder, a mistake in generation. Maybe this is a hint at the entropic nature of the complex, and a further connection to a track from the Out of Sync playlist, A Life, Entropy Part 1. But you'll have to wait for my Out of Sync theory video for more of a dive on that, and that's coming soon, by the way. One of the last things I wanted to talk about is the whiteboard from the beginning of the video. As we hear George and Marvin talking, we get that shot of a lab and a whiteboard with incoherent writing on it. Here is that whiteboard now in all of its coherent glory. We see an isometric view of the red neighborhood with several things labeled and noted. The first thing I noticed was the tunnel labeled as Team B being the ones designated to explore it. Async has also noted their interest in exploring the forest behind the houses and gathering samples of the vegetation present there to cross-reference with vegetation from standard. Additionally, Async has noted their intent to analyze the rooms within the house where Marvin found her stick buddy chilling in. This includes includes using equipment like tripods, rovers, and weapons, and also applies to their forest expeditions that they want to conduct. Lastly, we see a note to Price from Dawkins in which he suggests switching places with Mark Bloom in the expedition groups for the time being, which is unfortunate timing considering what ended up happening to Mark in damage control. Now, with all of this out of the way, let's make an updated timeline of the events so far. July 16th, 1931. Ivan Beck is born in Czechoslovakia to Doris and Antonine Beck. August 4th, 1972. Ivan turns on his prototype to the low proximity magnetic distortion system for the first time and suffers from an accident which seemingly establishes the initial connection to the complex. May 10th, 1982, Ivan presents his prototype of the low proximity magnetic distortion system at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory to the United States Department of Energy. July 2nd, 1988, Async tests the low proximity magnetic distortion system for the third time and are unsuccessful. October 17th, 1989. Async makes first contact with the complex. November 15th, 1989. Async conducts their lighting and tile survey. We also see them beginning to plot out the area in front of the threshold. February 3rd, 1990. Async ventures into the complex and discovers the body of Nicholas Bolton and the presence of the Hay bacillus bacteria. February 5th, 1990. The autopsy report on Nicholas Bolton is performed. February 29th, aka March 1st, Async ventures into the complex and Peter vanishes. March 5th, 1990, the day of motion detected, and Async's first recorded sighting of the life form, unbeknownst to them. March 11th, 1990, the images from archive.tar are taken. April 1990, Async finds the paintings within the complex. May 6, 1990. Our exploration team ventures into the complex and find the pitfall room. Marvin discovers the red neighborhood and has his first official encounter with the life form. May 8th, 1990. The Department of Energy comes to Async for the A-Space presentation and pitch for funding. Peter returns to Standard from the complex after being gone for a little over 2 months, and Clyde calls Ivan to inform him that Peter has returned. May 22nd, 1990. Peter Tench breaks from Async's temporary holding room and escapes back into the complex. May 25th, 1990. Mark Bloom, Randall Tachi, and Marvin Lay venture into room 14C where they are then ambushed by Peter. Mark is incapacitated by Peter, and Peter escapes back into Standard and is alleged to have lost his life while running away. But again, I believe he went into hiding. I digress. May 29th, 1990. Async examines the area past the door in the Pitfalls room and encounters the pseudo-Pitfalls room. July 4th, 1991. Kane falls into the complex and we get found footage number 1. Sometime in 1995, the car falls into the complex and the home movie is recorded. April through August of 1995. Ravi falls into the complex and we get found footage 3. August 18th, 1995, Madison falls into the complex and we get found footage 2. September 23rd, 1996, Kane's camera is recovered after no clipping back into Standard. Internalize this, write it down, take a picture, something, get it tattooed on your forehead, because this is a lot of events to keep in order, and as more episodes come out and more lore is uncovered, we're going to need to make sure we can keep them in order. So not only does this help us get all of the events in order, but it puts into perspective just how quickly things move in the narrative. Like, in the span of 1 month, Peter, who was presumed to be dead, suddenly shows up as if nothing happened, escapes back into the complex after being stuck in Async's basement for 2 weeks, blasts Mark in the torso, escapes the complex again, and goes into hiding, and the employees are told, yet again, that their colleague has died. And now you have to pull yourself together so you can go look at a wall that looks like it was stretched out like taffy and a table that's a quarter of the way clipped into the floor and the wall. Can you imagine? Strange doesn't even begin to describe it, George. But with all that being said, that was my analysis for Kane's latest video, Static Dead End. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if there was anything that I missed and if there was anything that you want me to go into more detail when I do my Out of Sync theory video. If you did like this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video, leave a comment, do whatever. I don't know, man. It's a free country, allegedly. But I hope you guys take care, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!